The year was 1900. The red dust of Kumasi had barely settled after the morning market rush when a chilling proclamation swept through the Asante lands like wildfire. Sir Frederick Hodgson, the British governor, had stood in the Kumasi fort and demanded the unthinkable, the surrender of the golden stool. Gasps rippled through the gathering of chiefs, some clenching their fists, others casting their eyes to the earth, praying the spirits would smite him where he stood. The golden stool wasn't merely a symbol of kingship, it was the soul of the Asante nation, carved from the heavens by the gods and held aloft by centuries of blood and unity. For a foreigner to even speak of sitting upon it was sacrilege. In the palace of Ejisu, Yaa Asantewaa, the Queen Mother, sat on her stool of state, her jaw tight with fury, her heart pulsing with ancestral rage. This was no time for hesitation. The elders had grown soft, the chiefs fearful, but she was forged of iron and storm. If the men would not rise to defend the land, she, a woman, would. In the council of elders, silence stretched like a funeral cloth. The room, thick with the scent of palm wine and old wood, held only the heavy breaths of aged men. When Yaa Asantewaa rose, her voice shattered the silence like thunder over the Bosomtwe lake. "Is it true," she began, "that the men of Asanteman will watch as our sacred stool is defiled?" Her eyes scanned the room. None met her gaze. Have we become so weak that we allow white men to mock our gods, our ancestors, our heritage? A chief, slouched under the weight of cowardice, cleared his throat. "Then the British have rifles, cannons, ships," he mumbled. "And we have honor," she snapped. "And I will not see the spirit of Asante broken by fear." Her voice became flame, licking at her doubt. "And if you men will not fight, then I will. I shall gather the women, the old, the brave-hearted, and we shall face the lion in its den." The elders were stunned. Never had a woman dared speak so boldly. But in her words, something ancient stirred, something not even fear could drown. Thus began the great revolt, not from a man's spear, but from a woman's fire. Within days, Yaa Asantewaa's call had awakened the sleeping hearts of the Asante people. Across villages, the sound of war drums echoed. Blacksmiths stoked their fires, shaping swords and spears with purpose. Women sang in the markets, their songs not of love or harvest, but of vengeance and glory. "Ah, Asantewaa Beko," they chanted. "Yaa Asantewaa will go to war." Mothers handed their sons calabashes of gunpowder and kente sashes, their eyes gleaming with defiant pride. Warriors, seasoned and young, gathered in Ejisu, awaiting the Queen Mother's command. Even the gods seemed to whisper their approval. Lightning flashed over the skies, and elders interpreted it as a sign that the spirits of old were rising once more. British outposts began reporting disturbances, caravans attacked, messengers vanishing. Sir Frederick Hodgson, still convinced of British superiority, scoffed at the news. "And a woman?" he chuckled, sipping brandy. "This Yaa Asantewaa will learn the price of insolence." He was wrong. She had nothing to lose. The Asantehene was in exile, the stool threatened, her people humiliated. It was not just a battle for territory, it was a war for the soul of a nation. The first strike came at dawn. Kumasi, the seat of colonial power in the Ashanti region, was surrounded in silence before the rooster crowed. Then chaos. Arrows sliced through the air like spirits of vengeance. Muskets fired. The British fort, once secure and unshakable, shook under the thunder of rebellion. Yaa Asantewaa herself stood atop a hill overlooking the city, directing her warriors like a general forged in battle. With red cloth tied around her waist and a rifle slung across her back, she was a vision of divine fury. The British, caught off guard, scrambled for defense. Sir Hodgson's voice boomed in the fort. "Hold the gates, send messengers to Cape Coast." But no messengers got through. The city was a trap now, each alleyway a grave, each tree concealing warriors with blades and fire. By midday, the British were pinned. Food began to run low. Morale collapsed. For weeks, they remained prisoners in their own fort, as the Asante closed in like tightening rope. Inside, Hodgson wrote desperate letters begging for reinforcements. Outside, Yaa Asantewaa waited, her eyes on the walls of the fort, knowing the war was only just beginning. While Kumasi lay under siege, the surrounding forests became the Asante's shield and sword. Guerrilla warfare was their strength, and the land itself seemed to side with them. British soldiers, unfamiliar with the terrain, were picked off one by one. Traps were laid in underbrush, narrow trails lured scouts to their deaths, and rivers carried coded messages from village to village. Yaa Asantewaa's leadership was not just ferocious, it was strategic. She sent trusted warriors into British supply lines, disrupting chains and burning ammunition caches. Every attack was calculated, every move deliberate. Her most loyal commander, Adu Gyamfi, returned one evening with spoils from a British convoy, rifles, boots, and canned goods. Anna Queen Mother thinks like a lioness, he grinned, presenting the British insignia as a trophy. Meanwhile, inside the fort, Sir Hodgson's once confident voice had turned hoarse with worry. The food was rotting, the troops demoralized, and sickness had crept in. He stared at a sketch of the golden stool on his desk and muttered, "Was it worth it?" But outside those walls, Yaa Asantewaa's war had become a movement. No longer was it just about a stool, it was about reclaiming a nation. From the coast, British reinforcements were finally dispatched. Heavy artillery, fresh troops, and ruthless officers hardened by wars in India and Sudan. They marched inland, destroying any village suspected of aiding the rebellion. Fires lit up the night sky, and the cries of the displaced echoed through the forests. Yet, Yaa Asantewaa did not retreat. She knew that the arrival of British firepower meant the war would shift. "And let them come," she told her captains, "when we shall teach them that a sacred land cannot be conquered by steel alone." She sent spies to the advancing columns, learning their routes, their weaknesses. Small detachments of Asante warriors ambushed the flanks, slowing them down. But despite their courage, the weight of British might began to show. A village near Ejisu was shelled to the ground. Dozens were killed, including children. When Yaa Asantewaa arrived at the smoldering ruins, her hands trembled not from fear but fury. She knelt beside a scorched stool and whispered, "You we not fall in vain." That night she summoned her council. "Fight until our bones are dust, or we see the golden stool raised high again." In secret chambers beneath the forest canopy, Yaa Asantewaa devised her most audacious plan yet. A full-scale assault on the British stronghold in Bekwai, where fresh supplies were being stockpiled. "Cut off their source," she declared, "and the serpent dies." The mission was treacherous. Bekwai was well defended, and British scouts were everywhere. But she chose her warriors carefully, men and women with nothing to lose. They moved by night, disguised as traders, crossing rivers barefoot, slipping through vines like spirits. When they reached the outskirts of the town, they waited for the cover of the Harmattan fog. At dawn, the fog rolled in like smoke from the ancestors. Then, attack! Gunshots cracked like thunder. Screams rang through the town, and British flags were torn down, replaced with red and black Asante banners. The supply depot was destroyed. Wagons of weapons set ablaze. By midday, Bekwai was in ruins. News reached Kumasi fast, and with it fear. Hodgson clenched his fists. "Priest woman, she is not mortal," he whispered. But she was mortal, just a mother, a leader, a warrior. And that terrified him more, because mortals could inspire others. And the rebellion, far from fading, had become a firestorm. The British, cornered and humiliated, turned to their darkest tactics. They began taking hostages, children of chiefs, elders suspected of aiding Yaa Asantewaa, and messengers caught with Asante insignia. Some were executed. Others were imprisoned in rusted cells along the coast. The message was clear: surrender or watch your people suffer. Yaa Asantewaa was given a warning. Her own brother, Kwasi Afrain, a respected noble, had been captured. They threatened to hang him if she did not lay down her arms. That night she walked alone into the sacred grove of Abrewa, mother of the Asante gods. She fell to her knees and prayed, "Spare my brother if you must, but do not let my people fall." She emerged with fire in her eyes. "Oh, let them hang him," she told her commanders. "His blood will nourish the roots of this land." We fight on. Some wept at her resolve. Others followed her into battle with renewed zeal. Even those who doubted her now knew she was chosen by the spirits. If sacrifice was the price of freedom, then so be it. Kumasi, once a city of laughter and music, had become a battlefield. The British finally broke the siege and stormed out of the fort like desperate animals. The Asante met them in the streets. Hand-to-hand combat erupted at the gates of the palace. Spears clashed with bayonets, chants drowned out gunshots, and blood stained the sacred grounds. In the midst of it, Yaa Asantewaa fought, not from behind, but at the front. Her red battle cloth was soaked in sweat, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. She moved through the chaos like a storm, rallying her troops, saving wounded boys, striking down invaders with terrifying precision. A British officer spotted her and fired. The bullet grazed her arm. She did not flinch. Instead, she turned and raised her rifle. One shot clean through his chest. But for every victory, a loss followed. The British had brought Gatling guns, and their noise tore through Asante ranks like thunder from the underworld. By nightfall, the city was ablaze. Smoke filled the sky, and the drums fell silent. Yaa Asantewaa stood among the rubble, knowing that the war had reached its turning point. The morning after Kumasi burned was quiet, but it was not peace. The British now had the advantage, reinforced by mercenaries and armed with intelligence gathered from traitors and fearful chiefs. In the days that followed, villages were forced into submission, their leaders coerced with gold and threats. Still, the resistance did not crumble. It moved deeper into the forests. Yaa Asantewaa retreated with her surviving warriors to a hidden camp near Lake Bosontwe, where the spirits were said to walk on water. There, wounded soldiers were treated with herbs, and plans for a new counterattack were drafted. But the Queen Mother's eyes betrayed her worry. Her arm was wrapped, her face leaner from nights without rest. News came that British agents had infiltrated her ranks, offering bribes and promising protection. One night, Adu Jamfe did not return from patrol. In the morning, they found his pendant on the forest floor, blood-stained. A note lay beside it, "And this or more shall fall." Yaa Asantewaa clenched the pendant and spoke, "For every one they take, 10 shall rise in his place." Her voice broke slightly. Yet she stood tall, for she knew that if she fell, so too would the last breath of Asante pride. A week later, a heavy silence fell over the resistance camp. The forest birds no longer sang. The warriors sensed something was wrong. Then it came. At sunrise, the trees exploded in fire and lead. British forces led by Colonel James Wilcox had discovered the hideout. Betrayed by a captured scout, the enemy had crept in from 3 sides, encircling the rebels. The fighting was brutal and swift. Smoke choked the forest canopy, and the cries of dying men echoed like a dirge. Yaa Asantewaa fought from a ridge, her rifle steady despite her injuries. When the ammunition ran out, she picked up a fallen soldier's sword and charged. Beside her, young warriors dropped like flies, but not a step was lost. Even as the British closed in, she refused to fall back. "Protect the stool," she screamed, though it had been hidden deep in the forest, far from the eyes of invaders. At last she was surrounded. Her sword was knocked from her hand, and the butt of her rifle slammed against her ribs. She crumpled, not from defeat, but exhaustion. Shackled in iron, she was dragged away. The forest wept as its fiercest daughter was taken. Word of Yaa Asantewaa's capture spread like wildfire. Some despaired. Others, enraged, launched last-ditch raids across Asante. But the heart of the rebellion had been struck. In Cape Coast Castle, she was imprisoned in a damp cell, her feet bound, her spirit unbowed. British officials paraded her as a warning. calling her aunt a woman who dared to defy the empire. Yet she never spoke a word to them. She refused their food. When a British missionary asked her why she fought, she stared him down and said, "For may chain my body, but my soul belongs to Asante. You will never rule it." Meanwhile, the search for the golden stool intensified. British soldiers raided shrines, desecrated sacred grounds, but the stool eluded them. The elders, knowing its power, had buried it in a secret grove under the protection of warriors who would die before revealing its location. Without the stool, Hodgson's victory felt hollow. He had crushed a rebellion, yes, but failed to possess the very symbol he came for, and the price had been high. Over 1,000 British and allied African troops dead, entire villages destroyed, and a people more united in hatred than ever before. In 1901, the British formally declared the Asante Kingdom annexed as a crown colony. Union Jacks fluttered over destroyed palaces, and colonial law was imposed across the region. Yet the land felt cursed. Crops failed. Strange illnesses befell British troops. Elders said it was the wrath of the ancestors. In their exile, Yaa Asantewaa and a group of captured chiefs were shipped off to the Seychelles Islands, thousands of miles from their homeland. She watched the coast of Africa fade from the ship's deck, her heart heavy but her spirit undefeated. On the island, she remained defiant. Even in chains, she taught the young exiles Asante customs, led ancestral rites in secret, and recited stories of their golden past. One day, she would say, "Our people will rise again." Back home, her name had become legend. Songs were sung of her bravery, children named after her, and even the British began to speak her name with awe. To the Asante, she was more than a queen. She was the embodiment of defiance, a warrior prophetess whose fire could not be extinguished, even by oceans or empires. Years passed. The war faded from British newspapers, replaced by newer conquests. But in Asante homes, the story of Yaa Asantewaa was whispered over fires and etched into memory like scripture. In 1921, in exile, Yaa Asantewaa breathed her last. Her burial was secret, humble, and sacred. The British allowed no return, but her soul, the priest said, had already flown back to Asanteman, carried on the winds of the ancestors. A few years later, the golden stool was found intact, untouched, still gleaming in its hiding place. The British dared not touch it again. It was restored to the people, and with it, a flicker of identity. Slowly, Asante pride began to rekindle. Resistance evolved into reform. Decades later, her spirit would help shape the fight for Ghana's independence. Kwame Nkrumah himself would invoke her name in speeches. A museum would rise in Ejisu. Streets would be named after her, statues carved, schools built, but nothing could compare to the legend itself, of a woman who stood when men bowed, who bled when others fled, and who defied an empire for the soul of her people. Today, when drums sound in Ejisu and the people dance in red and gold, they do not just celebrate the past, they summon it. Yaa Asantewaa lives on in every girl told she is strong, in every child taught to question injustice, in every leader reminded that courage is not loud, but steady. The war of 1900 was lost in arms but won in spirit. For the British may have claimed the land, but they never conquered the soul. The golden stool still sits, not in London, but in Asante land. And in the stories of fire, blood, and legacy, the name of Yaa Asantewaa rings like a drumbeat that refuses to die. It is the story of resistance, the story of womanhood, the story of Ghana. And when the winds rustle through the forests of Ashanti, some still say they hear her war cry, calling, watching, waiting for the next soul brave enough to stand.